Essentially, with this project, he completely defied everybody's previous expectations if they had them. He wrote a book on how to live a happy life. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. How's it going? Good to see you. Today is Arthur Schopenhauer's The Wisdom of Life. Published originally in 1851 as part of a different book. This is the first Schopenhauer that I've read. I still need to read The World as Will and Representation. I picked this one up because I read in an interview with the French author Michel Houellebecq that he read this in his 20s or 30s or something like that, and it had a profound impact on him. And he even went on to write a book about Schopenhauer called In the Presence of Schopenhauer, which I've linked to below and I will be reviewing one day. I'd heard about The World as Will and Representation growing up, but I hadn't read it. And I've read a little bit of Nietzsche, and I know that his relationship is with Schopenhauer is often discussed. Schopenhauer's name has been thrown around a lot with writers I enjoy, who are often labeled as pessimists. He did, after all, say that we essentially live in a hell, that this is in fact not the best of all worlds, like Leibniz said, but it's in fact the worst. You're probably confused why I'm laughing, but you know, we'll talk about that. He said a lot of things. He said basically life is inherently suffering. I mean, there's this whole connection with Eastern philosophies, Buddhism, Hinduism, we'll talk about that. But suffering was a huge component of life. It was, I think, for Schopenhauer, the main component. Life is suffering, truly suffering. Without suffering, without pain, you really don't have the will to live, I think. Is his whole idea. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, essentially, from what I've gathered from my very brief research, again, this is my first book I've read by him. It's very, very thin. It's part of the larger piece. And I plan to read a lot more. Particularly, the next one I'm going to read is going to be, I want to get the actual title just so you can find it easily. On the Suffering of the World. Right, yes. With an introduction by Eugene Thacker, who's actually, I have Thacker on the shelf. But In the Dust of This Planet, yeah, it's a very catchy title, I remember now. Yeah, I still have to read that. That is on the shelf. Maybe one day. Maybe one day. So is this a good place to start? Is this a good place to start with Schopenhauer? I have no idea. But it's where I started, and it's an unusual one for him, apparently. For this project, as I understand it, Schopenhauer was actually putting his deeper philosophy on pause in order to write a very interesting book, kind of a self-help is not the right term, but it's got a little bit of that. And a surprising one, given his track record up until this point. Given his reputation as a pessimistic nihilist. Again, his earlier stuff is quite dark. Essentially, with this project, he completely defied everybody's previous expectations if they had them. He wrote a book on how to live a happy life. The Wisdom of Life is a section from a greater work entitled Parerga Imparali Pomena, published in 1851, which is Greek for essays and aphorisms. As you can see, I speak fluent Greek. Schopenhauer is a big fan and proponent of the classic Greco-Roman authors. It was Schopenhauer's last work, actually, and the one that made him famous. Finally. You see, he'd been writing his entire life, and I mean, ever since his 20s at least, and that's when he wrote his major work, The World as Will and Representation, in his 20s, which is depressing. He wasn't wasting time, and, he was ambitious, but, I don't know, it didn't hit. And he actually has a section discussing fame in this book where he talks about it. We'll get into it. But yeah, the book from which this book is from is the one that finally made Schopenhauer famous. And he got to enjoy a few years of fame at the end of his life, which is good. But this book is actually what he refers to as a eudaimonology. It's a method for achieving the most of the one thing you think that Schopenhauer wouldn't write about: happiness. In fact, he had a very nice line in here regarding cheerfulness on page 11. Cheerfulness is a direct and immediate gain, the very coin, as it were, of happiness, and not, like all else, merely a check upon the bank. And that is the highest blessing for beings like us, whose existence is but an infinitesimal moment between two eternities. Isn't that a beautiful way of putting, of describing life? An infinitesimal moment between two eternities. Yeah, that's pretty good. To secure and promote this feeling of cheerfulness should be the supreme aim of all our endeavors after happiness. Yeah, that's great, man. That's great. Really quick and easy way to support the show, besides joining the Patreon, which I sincerely appreciate, would be to click on the Amazon link below where it says buy here, and just follow the link for the book, and anything you purchase on Amazon, whatever it is, the show will get a kickback just from you following that link, so I sincerely appreciate it. Thanks a bunch. So the book is mostly divided into 3 sections: personality, or what a man is; property, or what a man has; and position, or what a man's place is in the estimation of others. And each chapter is divided into certain sections. For example, the third is divided into sections on reputation, pride, rank, honor, and fame. While one should take all things that people say with a heaping grain of salt, and Schopenhauer is definitely no exception, he does hit the mark on a lot of points, I have to say. But maybe a little bit of introduction for those who haven't read him. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer was a highly influential figure, inspiring authors such as Tolstoy, Nietzsche, who famously initially loved him and then later in life turned on him, Sigmund Freud, the classical musicians Wagner and Mahler, and Thomas Mann, just to name a few. He was born into a wealthy family in Germany and had this whole trajectory set up for him, basically, to become a successful businessman. He totally abandoned it and went full academic. And from there became completely disenchanted with the pretentious, opaque blather of academic philosophy at the time. I'm speaking specifically, most notoriously about Hegel, whom Schopenhauer actually interacted with in real life. A flat-headed, insipid, nauseating, illiterate charlatan who reached the pinnacle of audacity in scribbling together and dishing up the craziest, mystifying nonsense. That was Schopenhauer and Hegel. Did I mention he was a shit talker as well? So Arthur Schopenhauer was a difficult character to have a relationship with in any capacity, it sounds like. Disagreeable, to put it mildly. Now, personally for me, enjoying the authors I do, I love it when you have somebody like Schopenhauer just talking mad shit while, juxtaposing these totally scathing insults with brilliant ideas, brilliant lines of wisdom. I find that kind of writing very entertaining. Anyways, that's just me, So what I'm trying to say is that it's not for the delicate. Anyways, it's also certainly not the most mature look for a philosopher, but, everybody loves some Schadenfreude, if that's the appropriate term, I don't know. But I mean, he's funny, right? He had that going for him. And nothing against Hegel. I have no problem with Hegel. I haven't read him properly, though I get where Schopenhauer's coming from. But then I haven't, successfully gotten through Phenomenology of the Spirit, so I guess I'll have to hold my tongue. But from this, you can get a sense of Schopenhauer's character. He really couldn't give a fuck what people think about him. We all do, and he basically points us out in the book, but he's basically, you can't worry about that kind of shit, You really can't. Or you have to try to worry about it as little as possible to get stuff done in life. He had what Michel Houellebecq referred to as a grumpy good humor. I think that's a really accurate term, of the tone of Schopenhauer's writing and thinking. I've always loved authors with that, grumpy good humor. Bukowski, Nick Tosches, Bourdain for sure, very New York. Actually, Schopenhauer would have been... Schopenhauer was New York before New York was a thing. Schopenhauer was totally a racist and a misogynist, though, and I don't use those two words lightly. He was, legit. You'll notice a few lines in here that are in completely bad taste. So, just warning you, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but feel free to chuck that fucking bathwater out, you know what I mean? But you can see why Schopenhauer was resentful of Hegel, that is. Hegel at the time was a philosophical celebrity, and even though Schopenhauer wrote the two majorly influential works of his life that would go on to change the world, in the future after he was dead and gone, he wrote them in his 20s. Even though he wrote them in his 20s, nobody cared. Nobody cared. And that's a really tough thing, right? When you know your shit is amazing, but it's just too much for your peers, the common man, which it was. That's a hellish place to be, right? Because you still got the rest of your life where you gotta toil and find a way to make some scratch and fucking keep trying, but you've already written your best work and nobody could give a fuck. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. That's how life works. He explicitly states it in his book. The more important the work you produce, the longer it's going to take for the common man to pick up what you're putting down, so to speak. So if you're sacrificing your life to doing something like that, get ready to be completely ignored. Yeah, maybe not. Some people are lucky, but as, time goes on, we see what lasts, how long it takes for it to be appreciated on a large scale. So before then, maybe want to consider majoring in accounting. Just, you're smart. You'll get the hang of it. You think I'm joking. I'm not. I'm not. So surprisingly, not only was this a relatively easy read, Personally, I didn't find it pessimistic at all. If anything, it intends to be quite empowering. I don't know about the full larger book that it's a part of, but he's critical, he's definitely maybe cynical, rough around the edges, no doubt, but not misanthropic or nihilistic like perhaps some of his earlier work. And this isn't at all to say his other works aren't, I'm sure they are, famously so. But with this one, Schopenhauer's, he's quite approachable, maybe not optimistic, but positive, And I'd say if you're going to pick this up and you're not used to reading a lot of philosophy, don't be intimidated. He's not trying to throw a bunch of obscure philosophical terms at you. He's not at all trying to obfuscate what he means, This is intended to be read by normal people. He's speaking in clear, easy to understand lines. It's not academic, particularly. It's sophisticated, but it's not, you know what I'm saying. He seems to me like a pragmatic materialist. I describe him as a realist, but then I'm probably wrong about that definition too. I'm not educated in philosophy. I'm a complete layman. So once I started thinking, oh, he's kind of like this, like he's a realist, or he's a materialist, or an existentialist, or whatever, some asshole in the audience, I guarantee it, look in the comments below, just some asshole will spring up and say, excuse me, cretin, he's actually a post-Kantian transcendental idealism-inspired pessimist who... Yeah, shut up, bitch. Those people need to die. They need to die. That kind of academia needs to die. Yeah, if you just shut down the universities, it'll be enough. You don't even have to do anything else. They won't be able to survive on their own. It's actually very easy to get rid of this, but anyways, money. Many of the ideas he gives in there, I'd wager you're already familiar with. But then at the time, of course, this was groundbreaking stuff. And many parts of the book are still totally fresh. Just as relevant now, maybe even more, considering the level of stuff that we have to contend with regarding technology, globalization, yada yada, the internet, media, content, the barrage of unstoppable sewage spewing out of our monitors and phones at us and on us all day long. It's just as relevant. It's good to read. So Schopenhauer was influenced by Eastern philosophy as well as Western philosophy, so like Hindu texts and Buddhist texts as well as Kant, whom I still have not read but need to. But I am a huge fan of Eastern philosophy, for sure. Though personally, I'd say I think of what a lot of modern Buddhists do is absurd. And I think modern spirituality is basically complete garbage. But I think a lot of what Buddha represented, the Buddha, is incredible, life-changing. For those of you who haven't read Hesse's Siddhartha, I highly recommend it. I've linked to a great video below on Schopenhauer from the channel The Pursuit of Thinking. I found plenty of material for this review from that video. It's a terrific short introduction, and also from the videos on the channel Weltgeist. I've linked to those below as well. Great stuff. Highly recommend you subscribe to that channel if you enjoy philosophy. It's explicitly stated in that video that he blended the ideas of Eastern and Western philosophy. And this makes me extremely excited to read more of him this year because I'm starting the Tibetan Book of the Dead soon. God, too long. So I was going into this with a little preparation, but not too much, And I actually found it to be a very easy, pleasant read. Very insightful and filled with well thought out ideas on various topics. Schopenhauer definitely appeals to me in a way that many of the great philosophers don't. Happiness for Schopenhauer, like basically the best we can hope for. Happiness for Schopenhauer is essentially a state of being pain-free and not bored. If you achieve fame and fortune, okay, sure, you've got that. But if you didn't build your inner character, for him, the most important thing of all, above all else, if you want to really be happy, you're going to find boredom. Yeah. So if you're just wealthy and famous and everything's hunky-dory and you haven't cultivated anything internally, and this is certainly the life of many people out there, you're going to be bored, and that's gonna cause problems. And boredom, real boredom, yields sometimes miraculous when creative, or horrific results, particularly amongst the wealthy or deeply jaded and perverse. But anyways, that inner character thing, right? That was Schopenhauer's big point that he wanted to get across. And you'll find that within a lot of Eastern philosophy as well. The core of one's peace and freedom is in the building, the cultivation of the inner character. Finding peace internally as opposed to externally. He actually mentioned Don Quixote in this great piece in the introduction, I believe. Since everything which exists or happens for a man exists only in his consciousness and happens for it alone, the most essential thing for a man is the constitution of this consciousness, which is in most cases far more important than the circumstances which go to form its contents. All the pride and pleasure in the world, mirrored in the dull consciousness of a fool, is poor indeed compared with the imagination of Cervantes writing his Don Quixote in a miserable prison. It's a great story, by the way. Cervantes, one of his arms wasn't even working, I think. The objective half of life and reality is in the hand of fate, and accordingly takes various forms in different cases. The subjective half is ourselves, and in essentials, it always remains the same. Great, great line. Love that part. Now, personally, from listening to certain ideas, I'd say Schopenhauer leaves something to be desired in his methods for finding peace in life, whether it's through art or aesthetic or intellectual pursuits, or, for the rare person in his opinion, asceticism. I'm skeptical of all of these things, actually. I'm skeptical of all of it. I think it's possible that all of those still contribute to suffering just like everything else. Just like any of the other stuff. I don't think we escape. And the vast majority really is just distraction, you know, from pain and suffering. And that distraction is quite brief indeed, and often self-destructive. Think alcohol, drugs, etc., food, bad food, I mean. And often discovering what is helping or hurting you is quite difficult and not intuitive at all. Quite the opposite. Our intuition says to avoid pain, but by avoiding pain, in fact, by going towards the things that actually briefly, temporarily eliminate pain, you can develop all sorts of bad habits. Alcohol, you know, takes away pain for a little while. You know, junk food and hanging out with people who are completely worthless are also methods, but entertaining. People who are worthless but entertaining are also methods of alleviating pain or boredom, you know? So, reading books which are funny or compelling or interesting, but which actually do nothing for your real life are a huge waste of time, a great way to just completely rot your life away. Trust me. Especially these days, I think we can see the logical conclusion of a life entirely spent consuming art or intellectual material, right? Or philosophy or whatever. Sure, it could potentially give you something of substance, absolutely. Or not. It just as well could not. It just as well could be another way to waste your life. Pessoa knew that. I mean, Pessoa said that literature is the most preferable way to waste life or something like that. And he's completely accurate. Again, it really does depend on your inner character. If you haven't built that up, it doesn't matter, you know, what you're immersing yourself in. Because at the end of it, and many of us will try to avoid it until our dying day on our deathbed, that question is going to come up. What did you do with the life that you were given? The one life you were given? How'd it go? What'd you do? What'd you push for? What'd you accomplish? It's not, for many of us, myself included, it's not going to be an easy question. It's going to be pretty tough. So yeah, it's not always intuitive, right? Discovering what is the right course of action. We do a lot of things because we think others think it's the right thing to do, but is it? No, I wouldn't. No. If anything, I think often the unpopular routes, the difficult ones, are really, not always, but perhaps more often than not, the ones that yield the most benefit. That does not mean that asceticism is the way, in my opinion. I think those people suffer just as much as anybody else. That much is certain. Personally, I really have no answers about finding inner peace. I have only things that I've kind of like looked at and I'm like, yeah, no, I see through that. It appears to be, for me, right now, in this chapter of my life, the ultimate damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, right? Wherein we're all simply damned, bro. I think you could find a life worth living through art and intellectual pursuits, but just because you pursue them doesn't mean you will. You get my drift? Just because you go to the gym does not mean you're gonna get in shape. It takes a fuck of a lot more than that. Trust me. Something like that. And the same is definitely true with asceticism. Sure. If you're an ascetic, it's possible you can reach some sort of, I don't know, transcendental state of consciousness or nirvana. Yeah, it's possible. Has anybody done it since the Buddha? No. Sure, asceticism would be awesome if you reached nirvana, or, you know, Christian ascetics or whatever. Take your pick. But let's just go with Buddhism. Buddhist monks, wherever they are. How many do you think have got there? How many modern monks do you think have got there? To nirvana, to freedom, to inner peace, total, complete inner peace. Somebody who's actually achieved the bliss and freedom they seek, the total eradication of inner conflict and the screaming of the desirous mind. None. And you may be very skeptical right now. You may be like, well, Cliff, you don't really know that. Sure, you're right. I don't know that, but my money has it that somebody who has achieved nirvana, freedom, bliss, total inner peace, unless they were in fact a proponent of human suffering, and therefore just about, completely evil. The very first thing they would do, after having achieved it, the very first thing they would do would be to share the wisdom, even if indirectly, You'd have heard about them long ago. The news would be out, guarantee it, around the world, faster than the speed of light. You wouldn't escape it. They'd be the most famous man or woman alive. The entire world would be clamoring to kiss their feet and steal their secrets. And the monk would give it to them, willingly, with joy in his or her heart, out of a benevolence for humanity, out of cheerfulness even. It's my wager, my money is on the idea that almost nobody in history, in the world, reaches nirvana, especially ascetics, whose lives are defined by deprivation and suffering. No, it's more suffering. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same shit, man. Buddha himself discovered this one firsthand, After going through tremendous amounts of suffering, hanging out with these ascetics who were drinking their own piss and eating like next to nothing, begging and so on and so forth. Again, read Siddhartha by Hesse. At the end of going through that for not a short amount of time, you know what he discovered? They didn't know shit. No more than the others. No more than him, no more than anybody else. They just were suffering. So that's when Buddha sat down in front of the Bodhi tree and said, I'm going to become enlightened, and I'm not going to move from this spot until I am. And he became enlightened. It's a great story. But those are just like my opinions, man. Finally, his section on fame, located in the chapter entitled Position, or Man's Place in the Estimation of Others, is a fantastic reminder to, as much as possible, stop giving a fuck about what other people think of you. You'll never get there entirely, but if you shoot for the stars, you might get like a third of the way, which is pretty good. Or just generally be at peace with yourself and the world around you. Let's take a look. Page 72. Near the end. It would be a miserable existence which should make its value or want of value depend upon what other people think. But such would be the life of a hero or a genius if its worth consisted in fame, that is, in the applause of the world. Every man lives and exists on his own account, and, therefore, mainly in and for himself, and what he is and the whole manner of his being concern himself more than anyone else. So if he is not worth much in this respect, he cannot be worth much otherwise. The idea which other people form of his existence is something secondary, derivative, exposed to all the chances of fate, and in the end affecting him but very indirectly. Besides, other people's heads are a wretched place to be the home of a man's true happiness. A fanciful happiness, perhaps, but not a real one. Better than food. I enjoyed it very much. Certainly worth reading and thinking about. So what did I dislike about it? Well, other than the crass lines I've already mentioned, I thought the section on honor was boring, because it focuses quite a bit on the dueling system and that kind of fashion of the day. And he's sort of waging war against its ridiculous nature, which I get, but I didn't need to read all about it. I tried to kind of find a modern day equivalent, but it was difficult. That part kind of dragged for me, but other than that, I really enjoyed it. Our world has changed so much since he was writing, but, then at the same time not, which is remarkable. And yeah, Nietzsche eventually decided that Schopenhauer was life-denying as opposed to life-affirming, with Nietzsche being the latter. But yeah, Nietzsche thought that he was totally deluded from the get-go, because to judge that having never been born or being dead is preferable to being alive or somehow better than being alive when you've never experienced it, it just breaks the whole argument in the first place. You're not dead and you've never been dead and you've never not been born, so you can't really convincingly draw that conclusion. I don't know. I mean, you think back to before you were born and you think like, oh, what was that like? And you're like, it was okay, Wasn't that difficult. You didn't have to wake up early. So, I don't know. Me, I'm still deciding. I don't really buy either of their arguments, but I look forward to reading more of both of them. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video to the show. And I place their names in this mason jar, and for every review I do, I pull out a name, and whoever's name I pull out, I send them a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and the coffee is delicious. So if you would like to support the show and get in on that, you can click on the link below or go to patreon.com/booksarebetterthanfood and donate $5 or more per video to the show, and I sincerely appreciate it. Pretty soon I'm going to be upping the price of the tiers because of inflation. I know, but it's the world we live in. It's the first time in the years that I've been doing this since I raised them, so it had to be done eventually. But if you'd be so kind to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/books are better than food and donate $5 or more per video, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you. $1 more will get you access to the Patron-Only Reviews, all of these reviews ad-free, and the cool stuff listed below. So please check it out. And the next Patron-Only review shall actually be one of Camus' most famous philosophical works. So you can probably guess which one, and if you'd like to see that, you can click on the link below. Thank you very much to all the patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Flavia R. Thank you very much, Flavia. I sincerely appreciate it. You're going to receive Arthur Schopenhauer's The Wisdom of Life, plus some delicious coffee, and I hope you love both. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you don't suck, and always remember, die reading. Take care of yourselves. Have a great night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.